Here is a little bit about my story, um, because the labyrinth is a journey, right? And people use the labyrinths to reflect and discover their own story and to understand, their life journey, because life is full of twists and turns, just like the labyrinth pathway. So if you want to contact me, my email is findlars@gmail.com and my website is discoverlabyrinths.com. And then I do have a YouTube channel and a Facebook and all that. But before I was a labyrinth maker and uh, lover, I was a photographer and I was a photojournalist. And this is a picture of me on study abroad in Chile, in South America, my senior year of college. And this is really when I fell in love with photography. I was a photojournalist intern for a daily newspaper in Santiago, Chile. And I was like, this is what I want to do with my life, is be a photographer. So this is a photo of me in rear view mirrors at a sidewalk stand. Um, and when I graduated, I decided to become a professional photographer. And when I made my love my career, I thought, well, I need a new hobby. So I decided my new hobby was going to be biomorphic art. So I started drawing these sketches in my notebook of like organic forms, and this is my alphabet of like the essential like patterns of nature. And so I got into biomorphic art, and then I learned about sacred geometry. So I Googled it, of course, like most people do, and I saw, oh, sacred geometry. Wow, interesting. Seed of life, Metatron's cube, like all these things. But in part of my Googling, I found this seed pattern for the classical labyrinth. And so this is around 2002. Actually, like basically when I first moved to California, to San Francisco from the East Coast. And so this is really cool. This is the seed pattern for the classical labyrinth. And if you want to, I don't know, take some time, not right now, but if you really want to experience the labyrinth at home, you can just draw this plus. Maybe you can do it now in the background. You can draw a plus and four corners, four L's, and then four dots, which makes a square. So across, four corners, and four dots. And then you just connect up and over from the center of the plus up and over to the L's. And you can go either way. You can go this way to this L, or you can go this way to the backwards L. And then you keep connecting the dots and lines, up and over like a rainbow, up and over, up and over, up and over. And then that's the Seventh Circuit classical labyrinth. So it's kind of fascinating to think that the labyrinth spread around the world by people passing the seed. It's like once you learn the seed, you can carry the labyrinth with you and then teach other people how to draw the labyrinth. Along with being a photojournalist, I also taught photography. And I taught photography part-time at a high school in Atherton at Sacred Heart Preparatory. And this is me with my sophomore photography students on field trip to the SF MoMA. But while I was at Sacred Heart Preparatory, this labyrinth was built in the courtyard. And I kind of saw this, construction worker out there building this labyrinth. And so it's kind of interesting that the first labyrinth that I ever saw in person was actually one that was being built, and it's being created out of these pavers. And so after it was installed, I was kind of like, well, what is this? I remembered walking like hedge mazes as a child, and I really liked mazes. Like in my notebooks in high school and middle school, there's all these like mazes and spirals and stuff. So I was like, well, what's this labyrinth? So I went out and walked it between classes to kind of experience it. And I was like, this is really neat. So I I enjoyed walking the labyrinth as a way to kind of decompress. And when the grading period came or I had a difficult experience with a student, perhaps I would go out and walk the labyrinth to like process. So then I thought, well, I'm the art teacher. Maybe I'll just take my students out there and, make it my class, my classroom. And so on the very first day of the semester, we would walk the labyrinth to set our intention for the semester. And then we'd return on the very last day of the semester to reflect on our time together and that semester work, and then think about, well, what is our next step as photographers? So, and then I told the students, the labyrinth is here if you ever need it. And even if the labyrinth doesn't connect with you today, maybe there'll be a time in high school where you're going to feel a little bit overwhelmed or distraught or, that there's no purpose. And then you can, the labyrinth is here for you when you need it. And then, of course, I was the one whose life fell apart and was in need of a labyrinth because as a photographer, I had fallen in love with a musician, and we had a great relationship for many years. But then my partner fell in love with another artist, and my heart was broken, and we eventually separated, and I moved from San Francisco to Half Moon Bay to kind of find myself again. And my life was in pieces. And so I thought, well, I need a labyrinth. This is what I had told my students. If it ever happens, you might find this useful. So it's like practice what you preach. And so I used the seed pattern, and I found this empty lot, and there were these rocks by the water. And so I put a labyrinth together with stones, and I didn't really know what I was doing. This is a time lapse and some of the images from it, but you can see at this point I'm kind of lost my way. But eventually I figured out how to make the labyrinth, and then it was incredible. Like almost immediately people arrived and started walking the labyrinth and talking, and like there's like 20 people here taking a moment to experience this labyrinth, either out of curiosity or, interest, or I don't know. So like the labyrinth is a magnet, and you can like create one, and then someone will inevitably arrive the second you finish creating it. So, and then I found it to be really powerful practice for centering myself, grounding myself, and reestablishing a sense of the sacred. And a lot of people, when you think of meditation, this is your, Google meditation, and this is what the meditation looks like, sitting on a cushion. But the labyrinth is a mindfulness practice, really, and it's a walking meditation. And so I heard that Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist monk, taught walking meditation. So I went on a retreat, and you can see here Thich Nhat Hanh, with the children in the front, and there I am kind of towering over in the back to learn the practice of mindfulness and walking meditation. And a lot of labyrinth walkers are kind of failed meditators. So I use this as kind of a mindfulness practice, and found it to be the sure path for uncertain times in my life. And as a photographer, I was working for the Half Moon Bay Review, the weekly newspaper. And so finally, after about 3 months, I got the courage to publish a picture of the labyrinth in the magazine. And the next day, the owner of the empty lot bulldozed my labyrinth. So then it was a practice of non-attachment and impermanence. But my friend said that there's another place where you can create a labyrinth. And so it was even a better spot than the first. And it was on this little outcropping peninsula in Pillar Point of Half Moon Bay on the path to Mavericks. And there were these 2 benches that were just sitting there by this spot where I could, again, just take rocks from the ocean and create this 7th Circuit classical labyrinth. And that became really my place of healing and finding myself again. And, you know, not only do labyrinths attract people, but they attract plants and animals and they attract puddles. But, you know, the labyrinth became a place that I could go to any time of the day, you know, beautiful day, stormy day, sunny day, foggy day, you know, happy time, sad time, walk it by myself, walk it with my friends, walk it with my family. And then when I would go to walk the labyrinth, I would often find other people already in the labyrinth. And I had created this for my own healing and journey, but it was so many people fell in love with this labyrinth, just as I was falling in love with labyrinths. And so even that dog, I love the family out to walk their dog, and somehow they got sucked into the center of the labyrinth. And now the dog's like, I thought we were going to run on the beach. Like, what are we doing? So after a year and a half of like reflection and ritual and, you know, processing that relationship, I realized that I was ready to move on. And I took all the stones from the labyrinth on the spring equinox and I threw them back into the ocean. So I lifted the weight off of the labyrinth. But my friend came to me the next morning and was like, Lars, someone destroyed your labyrinth. And I said, what? Destroyed it? I mean, I threw the rocks into the ocean. They said, you destroyed your own labyrinth? And I said, no, it actually, you know, it's still there. The labyrinth wasn't the stones. The labyrinth is the journey. It's the path. And you can still walk the labyrinth because all the weeds that had grown between the rocks, you know, remain. So the labyrinth is still there. And that's another, you know, it took me a long time to realize that, but the labyrinth really is not even the materials or the rocks or the paint on the ground. The labyrinth, like art, is the journey. It's the experience. So the labyrinth existed like that, just with weeds for about 3 months. But then in the dry season, it kind of, you know, uh, it became harder and harder to discern and kind of died off. So eventually, I rebuilt the labyrinth, and the next morning, somebody had taken the labyrinth, the classical labyrinth, and changed it into this wave labyrinth. And I thought, oh no, like someone's messing with it. I'm going to have to fix this. But I thought, well, let me walk this labyrinth and see if it works. And so I walked it, and you actually end up in the curl of the wave as the center, and there's no dead ends. So it actually worked as a labyrinth. And I thought, well, that's really nice actually to have a new labyrinth to walk now that I'm in this new chapter of my life. And the wave labyrinth actually reflects the setting and environment even better than the classical one did. But then the next morning, somebody else changed it back to the classical labyrinth because they didn't like it either. But then I changed it back to the wave, and then it stayed like a wave for the next 3, 4 years until finally I got engaged and then moved out of Half Moon Bay to Oakland and left this behind. And then eventually somebody else, it slowly disappeared. So this labyrinth doesn't exist anymore, but it served it had a good life, this labyrinth. And Jeff Sayward, who's the preeminent historian of labyrinths, he says, throughout the long history of labyrinths, whenever and wherever society is going through rapid change and development, the labyrinth has blossomed. Now, humanity is seeking the sure path of the labyrinth in an uncertain and confusing world. And for me, that was personally like my future was lost and it was confusing time and very uncertain. And many people come to the labyrinth during times of transition in their life. Either they retire and they need to find a new identity, or they've lost their partner, either through divorce or death, or they have decided to quit their job and find a new job. So many people come to the labyrinth and now we're going through such uncertain times, first through the pandemic and then now through the political situation, that many, labyrinths are very popular kind of universally at this point, because there's so much anxiety in our world today. So, my next girlfriend actually told me about the labyrinth at Grace Cathedral. So I went, they used to have monthly walks. So in 2010, I'm backtracking my story, but in 2010, I went and walked the labyrinth in January, and met Lauren Artris and found out about Veritas. And Veritas leads facilitator training. And so I thought, oh, and they also have workshops. And so the very first Veritas workshop I took was in the basement of Grace Cathedral with this man, Robert Ferre, who taught about the design and building of labyrinths. And I thought, wow, so I want to learn, how to make a Chart labyrinth. And so we're making labyrinths out of lentils on a table. This is my labyrinth out of pinto beans. And Robert loved the Chart Cathedral and the Chart Labyrinth as well. So he had partnered with Lauren Artris to create these pilgrimages to Chart, and I knew I had to go. So I quit my job at the Half Moon Bay Review. I put all my stuff in storage. I gave up my apartment. I had a goodbye party to all my friends, and went to Europe and took the facilitator training in Chart and walked the Chart Labyrinth, which, here's a historical lithograph of people walking the labyrinth. So it's really powerful to walk this pattern and think of people that have walked this during the plague, or, the French Revolution, or the World War, when the windows were pulled out of the Chartres Cathedral. This labyrinth was covered in snow because the stained glass windows were removed to protect them. And so it was a transformative experience. And also because I didn't know what my future was, I felt like I had to kind of understand my past and connect to my ancestors. And so here's an image of it from above through the keyhole in the roof. There was also an opportunity to create a new labyrinth in Chartres out of French cobblestones. So we created this Chartres replica outdoors at the St. Yves Hotel. And this is the Veritas group. But Jeff Sayward, whose quote I read earlier, he was the one leading the installation. And I said, Jeff, I'm trying to trace my ancestry in Scotland and Sweden. Can I visit labyrinths in those countries? And he's like, yeah, you should go to Iona in Scotland, and you should walk that labyrinth. And then you should go to Gotland in Sweden, this island in the Baltic Sea, and you should go walk those labyrinths. And so these classical labyrinths may be 1,000 years old, and it's just beautiful. So, I was walking these labyrinths in Sweden and wondering, like, did my Swedish ancestors walk labyrinths? Did they build them? And they're carved into the church walls. And when I came back from that trip, I thought, could I be a labyrinth builder? Could that be my next career? Because I was really falling out of love with photography, and I was falling in love with labyrinths. So I found this website by Robert Ferre, who I had taken the workshop with, and he said he was retiring. He was closing his studio in St. Louis, and he said, I would like nothing more than a young apprentice who would like to follow in my footsteps as a labyrinth builder. He says, our most experienced labyrinth artists are all pushing 60 years old or more. Hello, is there some younger generation out there to carry this work into the future? So I said, Robert, I would love to be your apprentice. Like, this would be incredible to build labyrinths. And so he said, great, I'll take you on every job that I have. And then when I retire, you can have my books, my tools, my curriculum that I teach. And this is the first Chart Labyrinth project that we created with me as an apprentice. And it's at Denison University in Ohio, which was Robert's alma mater. So it was incredible to watch the process and participate in building this labyrinth. And so, Marty Kermeen, who's sitting there, was one of the assistants, and he said, where did you first walk your labyrinth? And I said, oh, the first labyrinth I ever walked was at Sacred Heart Preparatory in Atherton, California. And he said, I built that labyrinth. So my roommate was the builder that I watched build the labyrinth 9 years earlier at that high school and created the labyrinth that I walked with students and, began my journey in the labyrinth. So, it's incredible when you get into labyrinths, the synchronicity that happens, and it's just weird how the path kind of opens up before you. So this is one of the last images I'll share, which is a shipwreck in Half Moon Bay. And, I got to the beach and all these pieces of this boat had washed ashore. And I thought, I'll make a labyrinth because you can make a labyrinth out of basically anything you have a lot of. So there's a lot of wreckage of this ship, and I created a labyrinth out of it. And I realized, my life kind of felt like a shipwreck at that time. And what the labyrinth did for me was allow me to put my life back together again and form a new pathway for myself to find myself again. So, you take the pieces of your life that have fallen apart and you have to put those pieces back in a new way that better serves you. And that's what the labyrinth did for me. And, I don't tell this story to like aggrandize myself, but just to say, I hope it inspires you to find your way, in your journey. And I think that's what we're all doing is finding our way through life. And, the labyrinth is a wonderful way to represent that journey. And it's a shared path, and we're all in different places on that path. But, we we share this same experience through life in each of our own different ways. So thank you. So that's my presentation. And if you want to learn more about my work or see examples of the many different labyrinths I've created, you can visit my website is discoverlabyrinths.com. And they're all different materials and designs. And in the Bay Area, you can walk many of my labyrinths because I've built over 90 permanent labyrinths. And in the Bay Area, there's probably 30 or 40 of them. And if you go to my website and click on locations, I created a Google map of all the different labyrinths in the Bay Area that I've built. And some are private property, so you can't visit them all. Some of them are like in people's backyards, but others are at churches or retreat centers or schools. Some of them have faded away, so they might not all be walkable. Yeah, there we go. So thank you for your attention and listening to my story. If you have any questions and would like to ask anything, I'm open to I can also look at the chat. Does the Half Moon Bay Labyrinth still exist? No. But there is a labyrinth in Quarry Park, which is also in Half Moon Bay, which I actually created with my fiance before I moved. And that labyrinth symbolically survived. So the healing labyrinth, kind of disappeared after I moved away. But my fiance and I on World Labyrinth Day in 2012, we built a labyrinth in Quarry Park in Half Moon Bay, and that labyrinth I think is still there. So
Very cool. Thank you so much, Lars.
yeah,
At the beginning, I think it might have just been the two of us connecting about the program, but you had a really great Ruth Asawa quote about the continuing line.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that for everyone? It's a beautiful link between what you've been talking about and Ruth Asawa and the nature of lines and being and all of that beautiful stuff.
Yeah. So a line can go anywhere. It can go inside and outside as it pleases. It can define space and it can move through space. So a labyrinth can go anywhere. It can go inside and outside as it pleases. It can define space and it can move through space. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful link to Ruth Asawa there.
Yeah.
I did have a couple of questions. Um, in particular, when you talked about your journey beginning with labyrinths, the term divine, is it divine symmetry?
Sacred.
Um, divine, yeah. Can you describe that term to us a little bit and what it means? A little bit, some fun facts and history around that?
Yeah, so sacred geometry is kind of the idea that there's an underlying order in our universe, right? That if we take a compass and a straight edge, you know, 2 points can make a line or they can make a circle. And if you use the straight edge, it makes the line. And if you make the compass, you make the circle. And basically the line is time and the circle is space. And then by taking the circle and building off of that, you can create these sacred geometry patterns. And then you can connect the intersecting points with lines and create, like the equilateral triangle or the pentagon or the hexagon. And so as you extrapolate the geometry just using circles or arcs and lines, you discover these universal patterns that are not man-made. They're in nature, they're inherent in the universe, right? And then you find them, both in the micro level and the macro level. And so when you create a labyrinth, you're also using just those same two tools, the straight edge and the compass, and you're doing it on a large scale. Like, see, this labyrinth is in Vallejo, California, but it's basically created just with a compass and a straight edge. And you don't even really need math, you don't need numbers. You don't need to like actually have like a ruler with 12 or 14 inches. Like you could pick a stick or you could just tie knots in a rope because everything is done in proportion, which is the other thing in sacred geometry is not only the shapes, but the proportions of the space. So, and then there's like the seed of life, rosette in the center. So that kind of adds to the geometry and the symbolism. And then these are universal patterns. So then you see them in different cultures throughout the world. Like many different cultures use the seed of life pattern. And then in experience in sacred geometry, it's like you're reconnecting to the universal patterns of life, the universal symbols that have existed and been discovered through time. And so I think that's kind of powerful with labyrinths is that you are walking, you're immersing yourself, or you're tracing your finger through a archetypal and even like a divine or sacred geometry. Yeah.
Sacred geometry. Love it. Thank you so much. I see that Lisa, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, please. So I have a very small front yard, and I'd love to create a labyrinth for my people in my neighborhood to walk. And I want to know what is the smallest, space that you can have a viable labyrinth to walk.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, usually like 10 feet, maybe 12 feet could be a smallest space. And there's a three circuit
Three
classical.
circuit.
Yeah, three
Okay.
circuit labyrinth is the kind of most simple form of the labyrinth.
Uh-huh.
So basically, like a path width is usually like 12 inches or a foot, would be
Yeah.
like a narrow path.
Yeah.
A comfortable path would be like a foot and a half.
Oh, you know, there's not going to be a comfortable path happening in this.
Right. So if
Yeah.
your path is only 1 foot wide and you
Yeah.
have three circuits on one side and three circuits on the other, that's 6 feet. And then the center is like 3 feet,
Uh-huh.
9, so three, you could have 1 foot paths and a 3 foot center, and then that would be 9. But then the line is incorporated into those measurements. So if you paint it on the ground, then you can step on the line. But if you're using rocks, well, then you have to add the measurement of the rock width, right? So if the
Right.
rock is like 4 inches, then you have to add all the widths of the rocks that you're using.
Right. Right. Got it.
Yeah, but three circuit classical labyrinth, and there is a link on my YouTube channel that shows me laying out a three circuit labyrinth in my backyard in Oakland, and
All right. Let us know how that labyrinth turns out, Lisa.
Oh
So
yeah, I'll
cool.
invite you. I'll invite you to the opening day.
yeah, I've built labyrinths for people in their front yards that are open to the community, and that's really neat. That's a great offering for people, like a little labyrinth library, kind of where you create your own community labyrinth in your front yard and invite people to walk it. Yeah, it's great.
Wonderful. We have a little bit of a profound comment from Denise in the chat. Denise says the classic labyrinth looks like a brain.
Yeah. A lot of people see that in the labyrinth because it does have that kind of it looks like a lobe, like the classical labyrinth is kind of evolved from a spiral, so there's just kind of like a frontal lobe and like it does look like a brain. A lot of people also think about intestines or a womb, the labyrinth being like a birth canal, and you can use the labyrinth as like a way to be reborn, perhaps, but and then Chartres Cathedral is dedicated to Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus. So the number of stones in the labyrinth that form the pathway in Chartres Cathedral are the number of days of human gestation. It's like 272 stones. So there is this, very interesting. You can see all sorts of different. Oh, and this is an example of the finger labyrinth that we're, the kind of type that we're going to make. It's on cardboard, and if you don't attend the workshop, you could do this, on your own anyways. It's basically like you take a piece of cardboard and you glue a piece of, this is a clothesline to the cardboard, and then you collage over the top of the clothesline to create your finger labyrinth. So this is an example of what we'll do on Thursday. Or you could do it at home if you wanted to. Just look up Mod Podge Labyrinth on Google. Yeah.
Wonderful. One more final last question, really quick. Are there any books or other resources that you can recommend to folks if they want to dive in and learn more?
Yeah, so the Labyrinth Locator is a website that you can go on and search for labyrinths wherever you are. So that's like, I have my website, but the Labyrinth Locator is like the global database of labyrinths. And so if you want to go find one in your community, it also has a new map function, so you can search by map as well, which is kind of cool. So labyrinthlocator.org. Veritas.org is the organization that I teach with. And so if you want to take a workshop or a labyrinth facilitator training with me, Veritas.org is a lot of my trainings, and we also do pilgrimage, like we're going to Chartres again this September. And then what else? So my website is Discover Labyrinths. And then books. So Lauren Artris is the founder of Veritas, and she wrote Walking a Sacred Path, which is pretty much the most well-known labyrinth book. And she talks about the story of bringing the labyrinth to Grace Cathedral. And so that's pretty interesting. It's more of like a religious use of the labyrinth, but she has a new book called The Path of the Holy Fool. And it's about the Parsifal legend and the labyrinth as a grail. So that's her most recent book, and it's really fascinating to think about it's like the labyrinth, the grail meets you where you are, gives you what you need, and provides an invisible web between you and, the universe or something. And so the labyrinth, it like meets you where you are, it gives you what you need, and then it forms an invisible web between you and your kind of role in the universe. And and then the question is like, how do you serve the grail? Because you can't own the grail, you can only serve the grail. And so it's like, then it's like, well, you serve the labyrinth by offering it to people and sharing it, and like art, it's like it lives in its experience. And so that's kind of what the labyrinth is. It's like, you know, I want the labyrinth to live, so I share it as much as I can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lars. That was really fascinating.
All
Yes,
right.
Evan's clapping. I'm clapping too. It was wonderful to have you here with us. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, everyone. Thank you, Lars.
Be well. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.